The old man eased his dusty pickup to the shoulder of a sun-scorched Arizona highway. A stranger stumbled in the heat, skin burning, lips cracked. Without a word, Leo handed him a water bottle and a sandwich. No questions, no hesitation. "Someone once turned around for me," he said. "Now it's my turn." 24 hours later, a Black Hawk helicopter broke the silence above his ranch. And that same man stepped out not to say thank you, but to salute. Leonard Leo Moore, 69, lived in a way that made time feel slow. His days were marked not by appointments or alarms, but by habit, rhythm, and reverence. At precisely 7:14 p.m., just as the desert sun dipped behind the ridge, Leo would step out onto his porch, remove his cap, and lower the American flag that flew in front of his modest ranch house. His movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial, each fold crisp, exact, and silent. The neighbors had seen him do it for years. Some waved from their driveways, amused by the ritual. Others chuckled behind curtains, calling him that old soldier or Captain Flag. Kids whispered that he was some kind of ex-military ghost who talked to no one and watched everything. But Leo never corrected them. He didn't explain himself. To the town of Dry River, Arizona, he was just a weathered old man with strong hands, sun-worn skin, and eyes that had seen too much. He bought supplies once a week at the hardware store. He fixed his own fence, hauled his own hay, and tipped the teenage cashier a folded dollar bill every single time without saying a word. He drove an old green pickup that coughed on cold mornings, and when he spoke, it was with the weight of someone who didn't waste breath. What they didn't know, because Leo had never told them, was that he had once been a Navy SEAL, and not just any SEAL. He'd earned the Silver Star in 1989 during an operation in Panama. His team had gone in to extract a captured operative. The intel was bad. The escape went wrong. Of the 6 men who entered that jungle, only Leo had walked out. He never spoke of it, not to neighbors, not to reporters, not even to the VA counselor who tried calling a few years back. He'd buried those memories with his brothers. One dog tag per grave, one folded letter to each family. Then he packed up his medals in a metal box, shut the lid, and came home to the desert. It wasn't guilt that kept him quiet. It was gravity. Leo understood something that many people never learn, that surviving doesn't always mean winning, and that silence isn't always emptiness. It can be respect, remembrance, or peace. The only place Leo let his past breathe was in the folds of that flag. To him, it wasn't just fabric. It was the sum of oaths taken, friends lost, and promises kept under fire. He folded it because no one else would. He folded it because they couldn't. Inside his home, nothing was fancy. A weathered recliner faced a quiet television. A bookshelf held military manuals next to old Louis L'Amour paperbacks. A single-frame photo sat on the mantel, 5 men in camouflage, dust-streaked and smiling in the mud. Only Leo remained. He didn't post on social media. He didn't attend parades. He didn't demand recognition. If you asked, he'd shrug and say, "I was just part of a team." But every evening, as the wind cooled and the sky turned burnt orange, he raised that flag for the men who never came home and lowered it for the ones who still walked with shadows. Leo Moore wasn't forgotten. He just chose not to be seen. The pickup truck rumbled down the quiet highway, tires humming against cracked asphalt, dust trailing behind like a whisper. Inside, the cab was quiet. The air conditioner had long since given up on fighting the Arizona heat, so both windows were down, letting the hot wind rush in. Leo kept his eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel. The man in the passenger seat sat slumped, sipping from the now half-empty water bottle, sweat glistening on his brow. His skin was sunburned, his clothes dirty, his breathing shallow but improving. He hadn't said much since climbing into the truck. Leo didn't mind the silence. He was used to it. He preferred it. But as the truck rounded a bend and the distant outline of a gas station appeared on the horizon, the man finally spoke. "Why'd you stop?" he asked, his voice raspy but curious. "Most people just drive by." Leo didn't answer right away. He squinted at the road ahead, then reached over and turned down the static-ridden radio. After a moment, he said, "Back in '84, I was the one walking. Not on a road like this, but deep in the woods somewhere in the Carolinas." The younger man turned, slightly listening. "Training op went sideways. Bad map, worse luck. Twisted my leg, ran out of water. Figured I had maybe a day left before the cold or dehydration got me." Leo's voice was steady, flat, but behind it was something deeper, something he hadn't spoken aloud in years. He continued, "Thought I was done. Then this old hunter showed up. Guy must have been 70. Drove a rusty red truck. Said nothing. Just helped me and handed me a canteen and drove me to a ranger station. I never got his name. Never saw him again." He glanced over at the man beside him who was now watching him with quiet attention. "I was helped once," Leo said. "I just never forgot it." The cab fell silent again, but it wasn't the awkward kind. It was the kind of silence that carries meaning, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. The gas station came into view, a faded building with a few tired pumps and a dusty vending machine out front. Leo pulled up beside one of the pumps, put the truck in park, and turned to the man. "This is as far as I go." The man nodded and reached for the door, pausing only to glance down at the now empty bottle in his hand. He seemed to search for words, something to say beyond a simple thank you. Before he could speak, Leo reached into the back seat and grabbed his old baseball cap, faded blue with a frayed brim and sweat-stained lining. He held it out. "Keep the sun off your neck." The man hesitated, then accepted it with a quiet nod, emotion flickering across his sunburned face. He climbed out of the truck, pulling the cap down low over his eyes. Leo watched him disappear into the gas station, then shifted into gear and drove off without another word. He didn't know who that man was, and he didn't need to, because to Leo, kindness wasn't about recognition. It wasn't about thanks. It was about remembering the moments that mattered and choosing to be the one who turns around when no one else will. The next morning started like any other. The Arizona sun had barely cleared the ridge when Leo rose, brewed a cup of black coffee, and stepped out onto the porch. The air still held a whisper of coolness, but it wouldn't last. By noon, the desert would be baking. He was halfway through his second sip when the phone on the kitchen counter buzzed. Then it buzzed again. And again. Leo frowned. Most days it sat quiet, just how he liked it. When he picked it up, he saw a string of missed calls and text messages from his old neighbor in Flagstaff, from Tom at the hardware store, even from someone he didn't recognize. One message had a link in 3 words. "Is this you? Curious." Leo tapped the link. It opened to a social media post. The photo was simple, a sandwich resting on a dusty truck seat, a worn blue baseball cap sitting beside it. The caption read, "A stranger saved my life yesterday in the Arizona desert. No cameras, no name, just kindness." Below that, thousands of reactions, shares, comments. The post was going viral. Leo stared at the screen, brows furrowed. He hadn't given his name. Hadn't thought about cameras or posts or headlines. He'd handed someone a sandwich, a bottle of water, and a ride. That was it. But to the internet, that wasn't enough. The comments section was a battlefield. Faith in humanity restored. "This is the America I miss. Whoever this old man is, he's a damn hero." But others weren't so kind. Fake vet trying to go viral. "No one does this without a camera these days, clearly staged. Bet this guy's been sued before. Watch next week, there'll be a GoFundMe." One user even posted a blurry photo of a similar-looking man from a different state with the words, "Is this the same guy? Total scammer." Leo chuckled quietly and shook his head. He closed the screen and set the phone face down on the table. By noon, a dusty news van had parked across from his property. Then another. A young reporter in a too-tight blazer stood outside the gate, rehearsing lines into a microphone. Her cameraman filmed the flag waving in the hot breeze. The caption on her notes read, "Mystery veteran or media hoax neighbors who usually ignored Leo suddenly became curious or cautious." Dale from 2 doors down crossed the street with folded arms. "Raymond, or Leonard, whatever your name is, what's going on here?" he asked, gesturing toward the vans. Leo didn't answer. He just nodded politely and returned to trimming his rose bushes. Inside the house, the silence returned. No radio, no TV. Just the ticking of the old wall clock and the slow, deliberate peeling of an apple. Outside, the noise grew louder. Reporters speculated. Commentators debated. A stranger had shared a moment of kindness, and the world wasn't sure how to handle it. Leo remained quiet, because in his mind nothing had changed. He still folded the flag at sunset, still checked the fence line, still drove into the hills when the day felt too heavy. The world might shout. But Leo had learned long ago that real meaning lives in what's done quietly when no one's watching and no one's recording. And whether they praised him or questioned him, he wouldn't explain. He didn't need to. Some truths don't require defense. They just require consistency. The ground trembled before the sound reached him, a deep, rhythmic thump that made the windows rattle and sent birds scattering from the trees. Leo looked up from his porch, eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. It wasn't thunder. It was too clean, too deliberate. Then came the wind, hot and fast, lifting dust and debris across the dirt road in front of his house. A moment later, the dark silhouette appeared over the ridge. A Black Hawk helicopter. It hovered for a moment like a giant mechanical hawk, then slowly descended into the open field across from his property. The whirling blades sent ripples through the tall, dry grass and shook the old flag on his pole until it snapped sharp in the wind. Neighbors spilled out from their homes, phones, and hand jaws slack. Traffic on the nearby highway slowed as drivers pulled over to see what was happening. Leo stood gripping the porch rail. He didn't flinch, but his eyes, steady, sharp, trained, tracked every motion as the aircraft touched down. The side door slid open. 4 soldiers in combat fatigue stepped out in unison. Behind them, a 5th figure emerged, taller, clean-shaven, dressed not in combat gear, but in full military dress blues. He walked across the field with purpose, dust swirling around his polished shoes. The others followed in formation, boots thudding in sync. When the officer reached the edge of the porch, he stopped, clicked his heels together, and offered a crisp salute. "Chief Petty Officer Leonard Moore, retired," he said, voice firm, and carrying over the hush that had fallen across the neighborhood. "I'm Captain James Avery, United States Army, Special Operations Command. You don't know me, sir, but yesterday you saved my life." Leo blinked once, then returned the salute. It was instinct, a muscle memory buried deep but never forgotten. Captain Avery continued, "I was conducting a solo navigation and survival exercise. Communications failed. Protocol prohibited the use of civilian contact. I had a narrow window to reach my extraction point. Missing it would have triggered a live recovery mission in classified territory." He paused, turning slightly so his voice could carry to the gathered crowd. "This man didn't just offer me water and a ride. He preserved the integrity of an active special operations mission, and he had no idea who I was." Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. A local news van captured every second its antenna raised skyward. Leo didn't move. Captain Avery reached into a cloth-covered case and withdrew a glass shadow box. Inside sat Leo's old sweat-stained baseball cap, cleaned and mounted beneath a brass plaque. The inscription read, "The Seal Spirit Endures. Anytime, anywhere." Sir Avery said, his voice softening, "After our encounter, we ran a routine background check. That's how we discovered you're not just a retired SEAL. You're a Silver Star recipient. You never claimed your benefits, never asked for anything. But your record speaks volumes." He turned to his men and gave a nod. In perfect synchronization, the 4 soldiers raised their hands and delivered a formal military salute. For a moment, the neighborhood was silent. No words, no gasps, just the wind and the hum of the helicopter's idling blades. Leo's eyes stayed locked on the men before him, not in pride, not in shock, but in something deeper, something like peace. He hadn't worn a uniform in decades, hadn't stood in formation or heard his name spoken with reverence in longer than he cared to admit. But today, standing barefoot on his porch in front of his neighbors, he stood taller than he had in years. The camera flashes began. Reporters shouted questions. But Leo didn't speak. He simply reached out, took the box from Captain Avery's hands, and gave a single, steady nod. The past hadn't returned to haunt him. It had landed to salute him. In the days following the helicopter landing, everything changed. The dust from the field had barely settled when Leo's porch became a quiet place of pilgrimage. Not for fame seekers or media hounds, they'd moved on to the next headline. No, these were different visitors, families, veterans, children. At first it was a trickle. A father with his 2 sons, awkward and shy, stood at the edge of Leo's property until he waved them over. Then came a mother with a teenage daughter holding a homemade thank you card. Word had spread beyond the viral video. People wanted their kids to meet someone who had done the right thing simply because it was right. Leo didn't say much as usual, but he'd invite them to sit on the porch swing or show them the now-framed shadow box hanging beside the front door. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. One afternoon, a girl no older than 8 stood beside the porch steps, hands behind her back, eyes wide and wondering. Her front teeth were missing and her shoes were mismatched. She looked up at him with all the sincerity a child could offer. "Mr. Moore," she asked softly, "are you a hero?" Leo knelt slowly, his knees stiff with age until he was eye level with her. "No, little one," he said gently. "Just someone who remembers what it means to be helped." She nodded as if that made perfect sense, then reached out to shake his hand. He smiled and gave her a firm grip, just enough to make her feel strong. But it wasn't only children who changed their tune. Dale, the neighbor who had once warned Leo about helping strangers, now stood at his gate every evening at sunset. He didn't say a word, didn't need to. As Leo lowered the flag with his usual precision, Dale placed his hand over his heart and nodded. A small salute of his own. Respect like trust is rarely loud. It arrives quietly and stays when it's earned. Leo never asked for this. He hadn't wanted to be a symbol or a headline or even a conversation starter. But in a world so quick to question motives, his simple act of decency had become something rare, a reminder that principle doesn't need an audience. Meanwhile, Captain Avery kept his promise. The military quietly included Leo's story in its officer training program under a section titled Unseen Acts of Service. Recruits watched the clip of the salute, followed by a discussion on moral judgment, quiet leadership, and integrity without expectation. The man once called Captain Flag by neighborhood kids was now known for something else. Not for his medals, not for his mission, but for what he chose to do when no one was looking. Leo's life hadn't changed on the surface. He still worked the land, still made his own repairs, still rose with the sun, and folded the flag at dusk. But something had shifted, subtle but lasting. Now when he walked through town, people looked him in the eye. And when they did, they saw more than an old man in a dusty cap. They saw a man who had remembered what others had forgotten. That kindness, when given, freely becomes legacy. A week after the last reporter packed up and the last visitor knocked gently on his door, Leo returned to the quiet he'd always known. The desert, unbothered by human stories, resumed its stillness. The humming silence, the whine of distant cicadas, and the dry wind brushing against the cacti. These were the companions he preferred. But the world hadn't entirely forgotten him. One morning, Leo found a small package on his porch. No return address. Just his name written in careful block letters in a wax-sealed envelope tucked beneath the string. He took it inside, cut the string with a pocket knife, and opened the box. Inside, cushioned in brown paper, was a handcrafted wooden plaque. It was simple, sanded, smooth, the grain of the wood visible beneath the polish. A single line was carved into the center. Some heroes wear uniforms. Others drive old trucks and carry water. No signature, no date, just a quiet tribute from someone who understood. Leo stared at it for a long moment. Then he nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. He walked to the old cabinet in the corner of the living room and opened the drawer that hadn't been touched in years. From it, he pulled out a dust-covered shadow box. Inside lay his tarnished, seal trident, the faded dog tags, and a photograph. 5 men standing shoulder to shoulder in the dirt of Panama. Eyes bright with youth uniforms, stained with sweat and pride. He was the only one left. Carefully, Leo placed the new plaque beside them. He didn't do it for recognition. He never had. But seeing those words carved in wood, words that honored not just action, but intent, meant more than he could explain. In the days that followed, more calls came. National news networks, book agents, a podcast host promising just 10 minutes of your time, sir. But Leo turned them all down. He wasn't angry. He just didn't see the point. To him, the real story had already been written in the footsteps of a staggering man on a hot highway, in the hand that reached out without asking why, and in the ripple that followed changing strangers who'd never even learned his name. The only story worth telling, he told Tom, who had stopped by with groceries one afternoon, is the one where someone gets helped. That's the only part that matters. Tom nodded slowly, sensing the weight behind the words. Outside, the flag flapped in the wind, steady as always. Inside, Leo sat at his kitchen table, sipping coffee in silence, watching the dust float through the beams of morning light. He wasn't waiting for anything. He wasn't chasing meaning. He had already lived it. And in his quiet corner of the desert, with no medals on the wall and no headlines to chase Leonard Moore, had become something greater than a hero. He had become a reminder of humility, of decency, and of the power of one small act done without expectation. The desert road stretched ahead, endless and empty under a rising sun. The morning light shimmered across the pavement, casting a warm haze that blurred the edges of the horizon. Leonard Leo Moore, as always, drove without hurry, His old green pickup rattled gently over the bumps the same way it had for years. The radio was off, the windows were down, and the air, though dry, was crisp with the promise of a new day. He hadn't set out with a destination in mind. Some mornings were like that. He'd just follow the curve of the hills until the noise in his mind quieted, until the silence of the desert felt like peace again. But a few miles outside town, something caught his eye. A car was parked awkwardly on the shoulder. Hood up, a young man stood beside it, kicking at the gravel phone held high in search of signal. His shirt clung to his back with sweat, and his face was already flushed from the heat. Leo eased off the gas. He checked the rear-view mirror, scanned the empty road ahead, then slowly pulled over. The truck creaked as he climbed out, grabbing a bottle of water from the seat beside him. He didn't say much, he rarely did, but he held out the bottle as he approached. The young man turned, startled, then grateful. Leo handed him the water. "It's just water," he said quietly, his voice low and steady. "But it might be more than that." The man took it with both hands and nodded. "Thanks. Wasn't expecting anyone to stop." Leo just tipped his cap, turned back to his truck, and drove off. No fanfare, no questions. Just one more quiet act passed along like a torch. As the truck faded into the heat waves, a soft voiceover begins. In a world where kindness is doubted, where cameras are quicker than compassion and headlines drown out decency, sometimes one small act still matters. One hand reaching out, one ride given, one bottle of water shared on a blistering road. It doesn't make history because it's loud. It makes history because it changes something, even if just in one person. And if enough of those moments ripple outward, they become something more. They become us at our best. Back on the road, Leo's truck moved steadily down the highway, dust trailing behind like a memory. His eyes remained on the horizon, but his mind drifted not to medals or missions, but to all the hands that had reached for his when he needed them most. He didn't know where the road would end, but he knew this: as long as he had water in the cab and room in the passenger seat, he'd keep pulling over. Because decency, once given, doesn't disappear. It multiplies. You may forget Leo's name. You may forget the color of his truck, the creak of his porch steps, or the sound of that helicopter descending on a quiet Arizona morning. But don't forget what he stood for, because Leo wasn't just a former Navy SEAL or the man who quietly folded his flag each evening. He was a reminder of the kind of strength that doesn't shout, the kind of courage that doesn't need recognition, and the kind of kindness that asks for nothing in return. In a time where so much is captured, posted, and analyzed, Leo simply acted. No audience, no agenda, just one man choosing to help because he remembered what it felt like to be helped. In today's fast-moving world where headlines change by the hour and attention lasts just seconds, it's easy to believe that only grand gestures or viral moments matter. But Leo's story reminds us that the most powerful acts often go unseen. Helping someone on the side of the road, offering water in the heat, choosing to act without expecting praise, these are the choices that shape our character, not for the world to applaud, but for us to carry forward. For older Americans, especially those who grew up in a time when respect, service, and humility were everyday values, Leo's story feels familiar. It speaks to a generation that believed in doing what's right even when no one is watching. So here's a question we leave you with. Do we still value that kind of quiet decency today, or have we traded substance for spectacle? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever helped someone in silence, or been helped by a stranger without explanation? Share your story in the comments. Let's remind each other that kindness isn't gone, it's just quieter now. And if Leo's journey moved you, if it reminded you of someone in your life, maybe a parent, a neighbor, a friend, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who still believes in doing good without needing a reward. Subscribe to Silent Valor Stories, where honor, humility, and humanity still matter. Because these are the stories that deserve to be told and remembered.